Hello and a very good day. My name is Abhilash and I am from the AD Solutions or the Active Directory Solutions team here at Manage Engine, and I will be your presenter for today. Now, before we go ahead and jump in, I would like to thank all of you for taking out the time and joining in on today's webinar session. I know it is a New Year's Eve, and I would like to wish all of you a very, very happy New Year. And this is going to be the last webinar session for the year 2020, and I'm pretty excited about hosting it. Now, before we go ahead and jump in, I would like to thank all of you again for your time. And like always, I would like to run a quick audio and a video check because since we're all working from home, I want to make sure that everybody out here today are able to hear me well and are able to see the screen well. So if you can hear me well, if my voice is well and audible without any distortion or breakage in the audio, can you please use the Q&A tab or the chat window and give me a confirmation, please? Just say yes, just say okay, just say great, just say good to go. So I can confirm that my voice is reaching to you well and clear. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much for your response. Looks like the audio is good. I hope the video is good as well. And at any point in time, if you feel the audio is breaking or if you feel the audio is lagging from the video, please do let me know and I'll try and get things fixed from my end. All right, so everything's out of the way. And before we jump in, I would like to tell you that the entire session, the entire 45 to 50-minute session that's going to happen today will be recorded, and the recording will be sent to you on your emails as soon as the webinar is done, probably within the next 1 to 2 days. All right. So yes, thank you so much, guys, for your time again. Thank you so much for joining in amidst your busy schedule. And let's go ahead and jump in. The topic for today is choosing the right enterprise identity and access management strategy for Active Directory and for Azure Active Directory. Now, why did I choose to speak about this topic today? Why are we talking about Active Directory and Azure Active Directory in specific? Now, the whole reason I chose to speak about this topic today is because many organizations in the year 2020, organizations such as yours, have adopted public cloud services like Azure Active Directory, are thinking about adopting public cloud services, or are planning to adopt public cloud services in the year 2021, right? So when a cloud, when a cloud element is introduced in a traditional on-premises infrastructure, the identity and access management strategy must change. It must be redesigned, it must be changed to suit not just your on-premises environment, but your cloud environment as well. Right? So that's going to be the focus of today's webinar. We will do our best to implement a centralized or a unified identity and access management strategy for Active Directory and for Azure Active Directory. Right? We will try to fix any errors that we've had. We will try to place certain processes, certain mechanisms in place to ensure secure access grants and access modifications. And we will also learn to ensure security, not only across on-premises Active Directory, but across Azure AD as well, right? So what is identity and access management? In a nutshell, identity and access management ensures that the right users have access to the right resources. Identity and access management ensures that there are processes or systems in place to ensure secure access modifications during a user's lifespan in an organization, or secure access governance when a user is onboarded into an organization, right? And last but not the least, identity and access management ensures security because it watches everything your users are doing, every activity performed by your users, every resource modified by your users, every permission change on your user objects, right? These are the three standing pillars of an identity and access management solution. Ensuring that the right users have the right permission to the right resource, ensuring that there are processes, there are systems in place to ensure secure access modifications for existing users, and also ensure secure access governance for new users who are going to be onboarded into the organization And last but not the least, every activity performed by your users should be tracked. And if your identity and access management solution caters to these three pillars or answers these three questions, then you should be good to go, right? So let's take a look at today's agenda and let's see what is in store for us today. We will take a look at the current IT landscape in organizations. So like I said, organizations are adopting public cloud services alongside traditional on-premises infrastructures. So let's take a look at the current IT landscape. Let's see which cloud service is being widely adopted. And we will see how this change in the IT landscape affects administrators or an organization in general, and even the end users. And we will see the security implications of an improper identity and access management model for your hybrid AD environment. And last but not the least, we will use Manage Engine AD 360 for a simple three-step approach for efficient identity and access management, right? So the current IT landscape in most organizations, this is what it looks like. Right? So like I said, organizations are adopting public cloud services alongside traditional on-premises infrastructures. This is the State of the Cloud report by Flexera, a survey that was conducted in 2020. And as you can see, Azure is the second most adopted cloud service, right? And Azure is quickly catching up with Amazon Web Services. So it won't be a surprise if in the forthcoming years, we see that Azure is the most widely adopted public cloud service. Right? The reason many organizations have already adopted Azure or are thinking about adopting Azure is because Azure integrates seamlessly with an on-premises Active Directory infrastructure. Right? The fact that Azure has out-of-the-box support for many applications like Salesforce or Dropbox, etc., makes it a go-to public cloud choice. Right? And according to Flexera, more than 50% of the data was in the cloud in 2020. Now, these numbers may not be the same for you, but my point here is data will quickly move to the cloud, right? If you've already adopted Azure, then I'm pretty sure some of your data is in the cloud. And in the forthcoming future, more and more data will move from on-premises data centers or on-premises infrastructures to the cloud. Right? So what does this mean to you? Public cloud services are being adopted alongside traditional on-premises infrastructures. And how does this affect you as an administrator, right? Or a help desk technician or a security analyst? Earlier, users just had a single domain joined account, right? Just a single Active Directory account where users could log in, perform their duties, access data, access on-premises applications, and they would be done for the day. But now, with the introduction of Azure AD or a public cloud service, each user has more than one identity, which means more permissions, right? Permissions earlier were limited to only on-premises resources, on-premises applications, or on-premises file servers, but now permissions are scattered across Azure and Active Directory. Earlier, it was just a single password, a domain joined password for your Active Directory users. But now there is more than one password because Azure AD and Active Directory have their own authentication processes, have their own password management strategies, right? Earlier, only Active Directory had to be monitored for changes because that's all it was. It was only on premises. But now with the introduction of the cloud, you will need a strategy that monitors both your Active Directory and your Azure AD infrastructure, right? So just give me a second, guys. I think we are having some audio issues right here. I believe some of you are facing audio issues. Can you please give me a confirmation? Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Looks like some of you are facing audio issues, but I think we are good to go. All right. So, Like I said, there are a few changes from your traditional Active Directory infrastructures. And now with the introduction of Azure, there are a few changes in the IT landscape, right? And identity and access management is crucial in every step of your user lifecycle. Right? For example, when your users are onboarded, you need to ensure that your users only have the access that they need, nothing more, nothing less. And during a user's lifespan in an organization, a user will undergo role changes, a user will undergo permission or access changes, right? And when a user undergoes these changes, you must ensure that these changes are authorized and documented for compliance and for security reasons. And when a user leaves the organization or when a user's life cycle ends, you must ensure that the user's access rights or permissions are cleaned up completely, right? So right from onboarding a user to a user's lifespan in an organization to when a user leaves the organization, identity and access management plays a crucial role in all of this process, right? So let's take a look at a simple three-step strategy to enforce identity and access management for your hybrid AD environment. But where would you start? Because you've got Active Directory, you've got your Active Directory resources, you've got your Active Directory applications, on-premises applications like Exchange, you've got your Windows file servers, you've got Azure, you've got Azure AD connected applications like Office 365 or Microsoft Teams or Yammer or OneDrive, etc. And like I said, it's important that we pay equal attention, that we give equal priority to both on-premise and cloud. So where would you start? The first thing that I would like for you to do is to gain visibility on the current state of your IT. Basically, try and understand which user has permission over what resource in Active Directory and in Azure Active Directory. Right? So when it comes to Active Directory, I would encourage you to look at these places to understand where your users have permissions. This will be a good starting point. Right? The first thing that I would like for you to look into is your group memberships, because groups make or break your Active Directory. Groups give access to files and folders, groups give access to applications, groups give access to other Active Directory resources, and it's important that you monitor group memberships. Right? The other thing I would like for you to look into is explicit permissions on your Active Directory security objects. The third thing I would like for you to look into is your object attribute values. Every object, your computers, your organization units, your groups, your users have attribute values that if they are not configured properly, this could lead to a security incident. Right? So every attribute value for your objects matters. And last but not the least, your Windows file server or your Ntfs permissions. Now, before I get into the specifics of it and before I show you how AD360 can help, what can we do using the native tools? Right. So there are two options. We've got the native GUI tools like the Active Directory users and computers and other tools, and we've got a command line shell. Right. Now let me show you a few examples. If I open up my VM right here, and if I minimize this, right? So this is my Active Directory users and computers console. Right? And let's say I want to find out what are the group memberships of my users. Now, how would I do that? I'll have to check a user account, right click on the user, and I'll have to head into properties and check the member of tab of that particular user. Right. So let me just show that to you, properties, and we should find the member of tab right here. Right. That's the only way you can determine group memberships in Active Directory. Head into properties, look for the member of tab, and you'll find the group membership right there. But what's the problem with this approach? Right? Let me show you something really interesting. If I open up PowerShell right here, and you can see I'm logged in as a user called Ross, right? And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give in a command that says net user Ross, right? So these are Ross's group memberships in Active Directory. Right. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to use a shell and a command or a script to understand which groups Ross is a member of. So according to this information, Active Directory tells me that Ross is not an administrator or a privileged user of any kind, right? That's what Active Directory tells me. Now let me show you something interesting. If I minimize this, I open up my browser, head into the AD Manager Plus component of AD 360, head into the Reports tab, right? Let me log back in again. If I head into the Reports tab and User Reports and Groups for Users, right? You can see my user Ross is right here. And do you see Ross is a member of the administrators group? And if I scroll further down, do you see Ross is a member of the Support Australia group? That's good because that's something we knew already, right? But little did we know that Ross is a member of the Support Australia group, which is a member of the Support Emergency group, and the Support Emergency group is a member of the Domain Admins group. Now, this is a scenario I see in many, many organizations. Groups are nested within each other. Users are placed in nested groups, and somehow they have privileged or administrative access, and we administrators or help desks are unaware of it, right? Because Active Directory, let's face it, doesn't give you the information that you need. Neither does the GUI give you the required information, nor does the shell. Right? So this is where AD Manager Plus can help a component of AD 360 to report on and to find the status of your Active Directory objects. Right? If I head back into reports and if I head into users and groups, I can select any group that I want here. And do you see this magic checkbox? This will let you toggle between direct group memberships and nested or indirect group memberships. And once you find that a user is a member of a group and the user shouldn't be a member of the group, you can simply check the user account and you can remove the user from the group or carry out any other management action. Right? So these reports that you see right here are categorized object-wise, are categorized attribute-wise for each object, and these reports will help you understand the status of your Active Directory permissions. Right? Let me show you another example. If I open up my ADUC console again, right? Let's say I want to find out what permissions my user Ross has on all of these OUs in Active Directory. Now, how would I do that? Let's say the admin OU. I right click on it, I head into properties, and here's the security tab, and I'll have to find the user Ross right here and check if Ross has any privileges on this particular OU. Right? Similarly, I need to repeat the process for every other object. Right click, open the security tab, and find out if Ross has any privileges. Let's say I want to find out what privileges Ross has over certain users or over certain groups. I have to right click on a user, again, properties, head into the security tab and find out Ross's privileges, right? Now, this may look like an easy method, but when it comes to an enterprise environment with many, many OUs, with thousands of users and groups, this process is not really feasible, right? Now, of course, you could use scripts, but let me just tell you that finding scripts that you need that cater to your specific need is extremely difficult, right? For example, if I had to find out what permissions my user Ross has on all the objects in Active Directory, and if I have to make a script for that, it's very time consuming. And like I showed you, scripts don't always convey the information that you need. Scripts often miss out on certain information, right? Let me show you another example. Let's say I want to find out what are the logon hours for my user accounts. Or let's say I want to find out which of my users have the password never expires attribute set. Or let's say I need to find out which of my users haven't changed their passwords in a long, long time, right? So if I have to find out how long it's been since Charles has changed his password, I'll have to right click on Charles, head into properties. Okay, looks like my console is not responding, but I'll have to right click on Charles, head into properties, open up the attribute editor tab, and inside of it, I'll have to look for an attribute called password last set. And that will tell me how long it's been since my user Charles has reset or changed his password, right? So let me quickly open up my Active Directory users in computers console. Well, looks like my domain isn't responding, but no worries. Let me just connect to another domain. Right? So that is how it would work. Active Directory does not give you sufficient insight on your permissions, be it attribute values for your security objects, be it explicit permissions on your objects in Active Directory, or even be it permissions on your files and folders. Right? So let's say here's my user, right click on the user, properties, jump into the security tab, and jump into the attribute editor, and here are certain attributes that I have to look through to find out when my user has last logged on or when my user has last changed his or her password, right? Here you go, the password last attribute, right? Similarly to for files and folders, you'll have to again resort to the old school method where you'll have to open up each file or folder, right click on it, properties, and check the security tab, right? Now you could use scripts, but like I said, scripts often don't give you what you need. It's very difficult to find ready-made scripts on the internet, and scripts can be malicious. As a matter of fact, Semantic says that 95% of scripts on the internet are malicious. Right? So let me show you how AD 360 can help. The AD Manager Plus component of AD 360, like I said, has reports based on every object in Active Directory. Right? For example, if I need password reports, this report will show you users who haven't changed their passwords in a long time. And you can select those user accounts and you can force them to change their password at the next logon. This report will show you users who have the password never expires value set. Now this is completely searchable. These reports have inbuilt management action. So if you find something wrong, you can conduct a fix, or you can fix the problem then and there. And if you have multiple Active Directory domains, you can just check the box and you can generate reports for those domains as well. Right? All you got to do is that you add the domain controller inside the domain settings tab right here, and you should be good to go. Right? Similarly, we've got reports for groups where you can find out details about groups, security groups that were modified recently. You can find out group members on a detailed basis. So you can run a detailed filter based on users and based on the attributes that these users have. Right? So this is a detailed group membership based search based on user objects, based on groups, and even based on an attribute level. Right? Similarly, you can do the same for your computer objects. The list simply goes on. Right? If I head into user reports, you find something called inactive users here. For example, this will show you your user accounts who have been enabled but haven't been logged onto in a long time. Now, these accounts must be cleaned up immediately because they are a security threat. And once you find such accounts, you can just check the box and you can move the account to another container, or you can disable your stale accounts or your inactive accounts. Right? So there's a log on hour based report here, and there are a lot of reports based on objects that you could leverage to understand the state of your Active Directory environment. And if I scroll down, do you see these reports called security reports? And do you see this called search permissions? This will help you search permissions for your Active Directory objects, right? So what are these permissions? These are your explicit ACLs on your objects. So if I have to find out what permissions John Smith has on every other object in Active Directory, right? Explicit ACLs are permissions here, right here in the security tab of all your objects. If I have to find that out, the search permissions feature will help you do just that. You can select an object, you can select a user or a group or a computer for whom you'd like to search permissions for. You can specify the permissions, and once you hit search or generate, you've got the reports right in front of you, and these reports are exportable as well. So you can export it, share it with your teammates if you want to. Right? Similarly, for files and folders, we've got something called Ntfs Reports, where you can find out permissions for all your files and folders, your Ntfs files and folders across your Windows file servers, where you can select a path, you can select a subfolder level as well. So this is a subfolder level search as well. You can specify the permissions, or you can set any advanced permission search that you'd like to perform. And once you hit generate, you have the report right in front of you. right? So this is a subfolder permission search for your Windows file servers. And once you click on permissions, you've got the details right in front of you. And this includes your NTFS permissions, and not just that, this also includes your share permissions as well, right? So here you go, your share and your folder NTFS permissions, right? So these reports right here will help you understand what's happening inside your Active Directory environment, because you can search based on individual objects, based on attributes of the objects. You can search your file server permissions. You can search your permissions, your explicit permissions on your Active Directory objects as well, right? And if I head into the Office 365 tab, you've got permissions for Office 365 right here. So the reports that you see right here will help you gain insight on your Office 365 or your Azure environment, right? So this will, let me quickly show that to you. If I head into Office 365, just within AD Manager Plus, again, you've got the Office 365 tab, right? So the Reports tab helps you to gain insights in Active Directory. Office 365 tab helps you to gain insights inside your Office 365 environment. You can understand which users are your on-premise users. You can understand which users are synced to the cloud. You can understand the password status of your Office 365 users, which users have multi-factor authentication enabled, disabled. You can find out reports based on your Office 365 groups or your Azure AD groups. You can find out reports based on your licenses, so you can ensure that your licenses are used judicially, are used optimally. And of course, since Exchange Online is a major feature that most organizations use, we've got mailbox-based reports as well, where you can find out permissions such as mailbox folder permissions and many more that you see right here. Right? So these reports that you see right here are more than enough for you to understand what the state of permissions is in your Active Directory and your Office 365 or your Azure AD environment. Right? So before I head into the next part of the IAM strategy, I would like to tell you that these Office 365 reports are crucial reports that you need for your environment. But if Office 365 is a major point of concern, or if Office 365 is something you'd like to specifically focus on, we've got another component of AD 360 called Microsoft 365 Manager Plus that will give you more insights into Office 365, more than what AD Manager Plus can, right? The reason for this is because AD Manager Plus is for your hybrid AD environment. It gives you insight into your Active Directory in depth. And because you're just starting off with Office 365, it gives you just the required reports you need for Office 365, right? But you need if you need in-depth or advanced reporting capabilities for Office 365, then Microsoft 365 Manager Plus can help you do that. The reports that you see right here will give you more insight into Office 365 if you do need it. But then again, AD Manager Plus's Office 365 tab is more than enough for you to understand the status of your Office 365 environment, right? So the reports that you see right here are a good start for you to understand the state of permissions in your Office 365 environment, right? So we looked into Active Directory, we looked into Azure AD objects or Office 365 objects, and we tried and understood what the permissions are, what the attribute values are. We tried and understood what was wrong, what needed to be fixed, and we fixed those permissions, we fixed those attribute values, right? What's the next step? The next step is to have a centralized plan or a unified identity and access management strategy. Right? The core of any identity and access management solution is to manage infrastructures from a single console. If you are jumping between windows, like your Active Directory Users and Computers tool, or your Azure AD portal, or your Office 365 Center, or your Office 365 Admin Center, this is not good, because when we jump between tools, it leads to errors, it leads to more effort, and that's not good. So the second most important concept of an IAM strategy is to centralize certain management actions that occur in Active Directory and in Office 365 together. So here are a few examples. The first example that I would like to put for you is hybrid user onboarding. So when you have to onboard users in Active Directory and in Office 365, you'll have to use multiple tools because the Active Directory, the ADUC tool does not support your Office 365 environment, and your Office 365 environment does not support your Active Directory environment, because that is how the components of a hybrid environment are structured, right? They operate in silos, they operate as separate entities. But with AD 360, you can automate tasks both in AD and in Office 365. This is an example of user onboarding where users can be fed in with a CSV file, and an automation can be run in AD 360 using which you can create user accounts in Office 365, in Active Directory, and an Exchange server if you do have an on-premises Exchange server. Right? So this is how it would work if I head into AD Manager Plus, if I head into my management tab right here. Do you see something called user creation templates? So AD Manager Plus component of AD 360 uses something called templates to predefine user attribute values, right? So this is Active Directory, so I can set the naming format. I can set the attribute values. I can predefine the attribute values for my users. For example, I want my users to be members of so-and-so groups. I want the profile path or the home folder path to be this. I want the logon hours for my users to look like this. I want my user to log on to only these computers, right? So you can preset Active Directory attribute values, and not just Active Directory, but also Office 365 attribute values right here, right? Where you can create the user in Office 365, you can set the users group membership in Office 365. And if you do have an on-premises Exchange server, you can predefine those attributes. If you do have an OCS or a link or a Skype application in your environment, you can predefine those attributes here as well. Right? So how are these templates useful? Because you can take the template that you just created. A template basically has predefined attribute values for a user, and you can put that in an automation, right? So if I click on create new automation, I can say user automation, I can say create users, and I can select my template right here, right? Called hybrid user creation. And I can specify the CSV file with the list of usernames. And once I specify the time and I run the automation, my users will be created automatically at the time that I want in Active Directory and in Office 365, right? So this is how we help. You don't need to switch between tools. You don't need to jump between windows. And since onboarding and offboarding is a major task in organizations, we help you perform those tasks because we let you automate these tasks, not just across AD, but across Office 365 as well, all without the fuss of using scripts, right? So there are many things that you could potentially automate. For example, you can clean up user objects. You can clean up inactive accounts in Active Directory. You can revoke the licenses in Office 365 as well, all from this one console. Right? So automations offers a lot more features. I would encourage you to check out this tab, mix and match automations, and create what you need, right? You could also create a potential automation policy where you could define multiple tasks in a policy, right? For example, I could say create users, and I can add a task, and I can say something else. So after this particular interval of time, another task will be executed. So you can attach a sequence of tasks in a policy. You can use the policy in an automation, right? So it's not just one task. You can assign a sequence of tasks in an automation, and you could apply that, and you could run that as an entire automation itself, right? Another way we help you is we help you delegate certain activities, not just in Active Directory, but across Office 365 as well, right? So if I head into help desk roles right here under delegation, and let's say create a new role, right? And let's say I want my HR manager or my marketing manager to onboard users. So I'm going to say marketing manager right here, and I'm going to say you can create users. You can also reset their passwords. You can add them to groups if you want to, and not just across AD, but you can create users across Office 365 as well, if need be. You can assign licenses to those users as well, right? So this is admin task delegation to your end users, not just across AD, but across Office 365 as well, right? Thus centralizing certain activities. So you don't have to jump between Active Directory and Office 365. You can use this one tab to delegate admin activities across AD and across Office 365. right? If I head back into the delegation window, you'll find something called Audit Report right here that audits all the activities that your technicians are performing. Because once a role is assigned to a technician is no one but your Active Directory user. The technician can log on to the console, in this case, the AD Manager Plus console, to perform the activities that were delegated to him or her by the administrator, right? The Audit Reports keeps track of what activities your technicians are performing, and the help desk reports right here and the technicians report right here will help you maintain a checklist of all privileges delegated to your technicians, not just in AD, but in Office 365 as well, right? So we've addressed two use cases here. One, user onboarding across AD, across Office 365. User offboarding across AD, across Office 365. Stale user account cleanup across AD, across Office 365, and user admin role delegation to your end users across AD and Office 365, all from a single console. Right? So this is how delegation would work in AD Manager Plus component of AD 360. But again, if Office 365 is more of your concern, you've got the delegation tab in Office 365, using which you can delegate certain activities into Office 365 as well, right? But then again, AD Manager Plus would suit for your problems. But if in-depth Office 365 is something you're concerned about, if you want to delegate activities only specific to Office 365, then we've got Microsoft 365 Manager Plus as well, right? Similarly, you've got the delegation tab, you've got automations that you could run only in Office 365 as well, right? So it's up to you, choose the solution that you need. If AD and Office 365 together is your concern, then AD Manager Plus will work. If Office 365 is your major point of concern, then M365 Manager Plus would be the solution to go, right? Now, another important thing I wanted to talk about was your management actions in Active Directory and in Office 365. Right? Now, we spoke about certain reports. Right? I showed you many reports right here using which you could gain insights inside your Active Directory and your Office 365 environment. Right? But you can also perform certain activities in bulk across AD and Office 365. For example, if I head into the management tab in AD Manager Plus, you see something called file server management. And if I click on modify Ntfs permissions, the permissions right here will help you bulk modify your file or folder permissions. So you could select multiple folders, you could select the permissions for those folders. And once you hit modify, you can bulk modify permissions across your Windows folders right from this console. Right? So this is multi-Windows file server, multi-Windows folder permission management just from this one console. Right? Do you see this checkbox right here? If you check this, it will remove all existing permissions on a set or a particular Windows folder, and it will apply the permissions that you've specified right here. If you already have a Windows file or folder with least privilege access implemented, you can copy those permissions from the folder and you can let it apply to the set of folders that you specified here, right? So not just visibility into what's happening, we also let you manage certain activities in Active Directory and in Office 365, right? For example, you could bulk reset passwords for your users, where you could generate a random password, you could type a password, where you could give in a name for the user, or you could import a CSV file with a list of usernames. You can bulk unlock your user accounts. You can bulk manage the group memberships of your users. You can bulk move users from one location to another. So this is attribute level targeting again, not to view the information, but to modify or to manage the information in bulk for your objects, right? Similarly, for Office 365, we've got a management tab, just like Active Directory, where you can perform Office 365 management activities in bulk. For example, unblocking or blocking users, assigning or removing licenses for user objects, or managing groups, your Office 365 groups, or your distribution groups, or your Azure AD groups from this console. Right? So this is something I wanted to talk about, just not reporting into what's happening. You can also manage certain activities, again, divided into objects, divided on an attribute level in bulk for your users, either in AD or in Office 365. Right? Another important aspect I wanted to cover is your passwords. In an identity and access management strategy, passwords play a crucial role because passwords are the first line of defense for your environment, right? And this is what I propose: a universal password policy for your Active Directory, your Azure, your Office 365, or any other cloud application in your environment, right? Why do I propose a universal password policy? Because when there are separate password rules, when there are different password policies across applications, the administrator is confused, the users are frustrated because they need to adhere to multiple password guidelines and they need to satisfy many password policies to create a password. And when admins cannot keep track of password policies, when users are frustrated because of multiple password guidelines or rules across applications, this is a dangerous combination. And a weak password is always a security threat. Right? So that's why I would encourage you to employ a single password policy, and AD Self-Service Plus component of AD 360 can help you with that. So if I head into AD Self-Service Plus and configuration, right? Let me quickly log back in. I head into the configuration. Do you see this called policy configuration? So once you create a policy in AD Self-Service Plus, it applies based on your OUs, your groups, or your individual users in Active Directory, right? So once your policy is created, you can head into this option called Password Policy Enforcer, where you could enforce a custom password policy for your Active Directory users, right? So what is a custom password policy? Why is it so important? Now, your Active Directory password policy looks something like this, right? So I apologize, my system has crashed, but it does look something like this, right? These 6 settings are used to determine the password strength in your organization, right? The problem with this is these 6 settings have been around for a long, long time, probably from the year 2000, from the time an Active Directory was invented. And because they've been around for a long time, attackers have found a way around these policies. There are many, many password attacks catered to break these password policy rules. Users can still get away with weak passwords, and that's why it's important and it's the need of the hour for you to update your password policies, right? So these are password policy rules that are updated, and do hear me out. These rules do not replace your native password policy. They do not replace your Active Directory password policy, but they work in cohesion with your Active Directory password policy. Right? There are many rules right here. For example, you can restrict the usage of characters from an older username or from an older password. You can restrict certain patterns like password at 123 or QWERTY at 123, something that is still widely used in organizations. You can ban the use of dictionary words. You can set the minimum and maximum length of a password. You can set the number of upper characters, lower level characters in a particular password. And once this password policy is enforced, your user will have to adhere to the rules right here in order to log on to Active Directory, in order to create a password that is acceptable by Active Directory, right? And do keep in mind that these password policies, the custom password policy, is granular, meaning you can apply this policy based on your Active Directory OUs, your groups, and your individual users as well, right? Because like I said, we configure a policy when we log into AD Self-Service Plus. This policy can be applied based on OUs, groups, and users, and that policy is used in the enforcer, right? So if you need a granular, a stronger password policy for your admin users or for your privileged users, you can do that with AD Self-Service Plus policies, which is something that you can't do with the native Active Directory password policy. Right? Now, the question of the hour is, I've only been talking about Active Directory so far, right? These policies only apply to Active Directory. How do we tend to Office 365, or how do we tend to any other cloud applications that my users may have logon access to? That's when single sign-on comes into the picture, right? So I'm pretty sure you know what single sign-on is. So using single sign-on, you can ensure that your user only has to enter a password once, that is at your Active Directory logon. And once the user enters the password, that's all your user needs to do, right? So this is how it would work. Let me show you a quick video right here. So my user logs on to his or her domain join system, tries to access Office 365. And once the user enters Office 365, here's what happens, right? AD Self-Service Plus that you see on the screen right now will automatically authenticate the user and auto log on the user into Office 365 without the user having to enter the password another time, right? Now, why is this important? Because we've employed single sign-on, and with single sign-on, what we've effectively done is we've brought down the logons across Office 365 or across any other cloud application to just one logon. That is your Active Directory logon. So this is what the end picture would look like. The user logs on to Active Directory with the password. And once the user logs on to Active Directory, that's all your user needs to do, because then with single sign-on, your user will have seamless access to all cloud applications, right? So as you can see, single sign-on can be applied to close to 107 applications here. But if you have a custom third-party application that you would like to set up single sign-on for, you can do so as well, right? But ensure that the application is SAML supported, right? And again, single sign-on works on the basis of policies, and policies can be applied based on groups, OUs, and individual users in Active Directory, right? So this is how the end result of your logins in your hybrid AD environment would look like. User enters the password, which is governed by the custom password policy, and can also undergo multi-factor authentication. This is something really important. So in AD Self-Service Plus, you've got the ability to set up multi-factor authentication, right? There are close to 14 methods you can set up for multi-factor authentication, again, based on OUs, groups, and users in Active Directory. And this is how the end result of your logons in your hybrid AD environment would look like, right? A user, you can see that this is me, logs on to his or her Active Directory environment, enters the password that is governed by the Active Directory password policy. And once the user does that, the multi-factor authentication process will kick in, and the user receives a request on his or her smartphone based on the multi-factor authentication method setup. And once the user approves the multi-factor authentication process or the method, the user will be logged onto the domain, and that's all your user needs to do, right? One-time password, one-time multi-factor authentication, and seamless access to all cloud applications, right? So what we've essentially done here is we've brought down the million logons in a hybrid AD environment or in an environment with cloud applications to just one, the Active Directory logon, which is secured with a custom password policy, which is also protected with a multi-factor authentication process. Right? So there's a lot more you can do with AD 360. We saw how we could discover permissions. We saw how we could mend certain mistakes in permissions in AD and in Azure with the built-in management actions. We saw how we could perform bulk management actions on objects in Active Directory or in Azure. We learned how to centralize certain management processes like user onboarding, offboarding, stale account cleanup, or even delegations. We enforced a universal password policy. The last thing that we need to do is enforce security. And when I say security, the first thing that comes to mind is your audit logs. Audit logs are crucial for you to monitor sensitive activities happening in your Active Directory or your Azure AD environment. Right? The problem with audit logs is that they have certain limitations, both in AD and in Azure. Active Directory has something called the event viewer, and Azure AD has something called the audit logs. Right? The problem with these two is that they both record a large amount of activities. Right? So if I head into my Active Directory domain controller, this is the event viewer, right? And if I clear the filter, you see the number of events right here. There are close to 25,000 events. So every group change, every file or folder change, every group policy change, every log on log off activity, every permission change on your objects or your files and folders will be recorded right here. And these logs cannot be filtered easily, which is a problem when it comes to an Active Directory environment. Similarly, when we talk about Azure, we've got the Azure AD Audit Logs. So if I scroll down, you see something called Audit Logs right here that face the similar problems when compared to Active Directory, right? There are many events recorded here based on Azure Active Directory groups, objects, Azure Active Directory applications, licenses assigned to users, roles assigned to users, etc. And these logs are not easy to filter, right? Now, we do not have the time to get into the specifics of how these particular interfaces fail when it comes to auditing, but in a nutshell, it looks something like this. Active Directory records events only for a specific amount of time, and once the memory reaches its upper limit, Active Directory will overwrite the recorded events, or Active Directory will simply stop recording events. Azure AD only retains logs for 30 days. So any audited event in Azure will be retained for 30 days. So after 30 days, the audited event will automatically be dropped, right? Filtering capabilities are extremely poor in AD Audit Logs and in Azure Audit Logs, and you cannot tie a mitigation strategy to an audited event, right? Now, let me show you a really simple example right here. So if I open up my window, I could have shown this attack live, but since my system has crashed, let me show you something right here, right? So here's how it's going to work. Take a look at this attack, right? This is a password spray attack on your Active Directory users, right? So I log on as the user Ross into my Active Directory console, and I simply import a script, a simple script, a PowerShell script that I will use to perform a password attack on my Active Directory users. Right. So once I invoke the script and once I invoke the function in the script, you can see that I'm trying to perform a password spray attack with the password at 123. And once I hit confirm, you can see that within a few seconds, I have the list of users and their plain text passwords right in front of me. And remember that this attack could be performed by a user with absolutely no privileges, right? So Ross could log on, run a PowerShell script, compromise a list of Active Directory users and their passwords, right? Now, if we have to detect such attack attempts in Active Directory, we have to depend on the event viewer, like I just spoke about, right? And this is how the event viewer fails. So let me quickly open up the event viewer, right? So this is my event viewer, and these are all my logs, right? So let me quickly run a filter here to filter these logs based on logon activities on my domain, because we are trying to detect a password attack attempt, right? So I enter the event ID 4624. These are all the logon activities on my domain. And do you see the number of events recorded here? That's 700 logon events on my domain, and I am the sole owner of the system. Now imagine the number of log on and log off events in an enterprise environment or on a domain controller. Now, how could I potentially detect a password spray or a brute force attack attempt from these logs, right? So both Active Directory and Azure record audited events, record security events, which is good. But if we cannot understand the meaning behind a recorded event or an audited event, then what's the point of auditing? Right? So this is when AD 360 simplifies things for you, because AD 360 has a component called AD Audit Plus, using which you can report on Active Directory and in Azure Active Directory. Right? Do you see this report right here called Log on Failures? This will show you all the log on failures that have occurred in your Active Directory environment. You can search based on user account. You can search based on time. So if logon failures occur within a few seconds gap, it could be an automated password attack. That is something that has to be brought to notice. And these reports that you see right here are searchable. If you have multiple domain controllers, you can just choose the domain controller from the drop down and you can find the list of logon failures on your domain. And the reports that you see right here are completely actionable, right? For example, I have an alert right here to detect logon failures. Let me quickly minimize this. So if I head into the alerting tab, I have the alert right there to detect log on failures in my Active Directory environment, right? So here you go, log on failures for admin users. This alert will alert me as an admin whenever there is a log on failure, right? So if there's a log on failure for an admin user, I will receive an alert via email, via SMS. These alerts that you see right here are completely customizable. For example, you could set thresholds. If there are more than 10 logon failures occurring in under a minute, then throw me an alert. If there are group membership changes occurring in AD or in Azure outside of business hours, if a user is performing illicit activities in AD or Azure outside of business hours, then throw me an alert, right? You can filter these alerts based on your Azure or your Active Directory objects. You can alert the authorized users, and you can also execute a script. What does the script do here? The script is kind of a remedial activity, a remedial option for an alerted event. For example, if there's a password attack in your organization, these alerts will alert the authorized users, and the script that you pre-configured here will terminate the attacker's session, or will perhaps terminate the victim user or disable the victim user to stop the spread of the attack. Right? So there's a lot we can look into, and the reports that you see right here are more than enough to change monitor your Active Directory and your Azure AD infrastructure in real time, right? So these reports and Active Directory reports that you see right here will audit your Active Directory infrastructure in real time, right? It audits your user objects. So for example, when users' passwords are reset, when flags are set, like the password never expires, flag is set on user account. When there are attribute changes based on groups, computers, or OUs, when there are group policy objects created or deleted or modified, when there are group policy settings that were enabled or disabled, when there are permission changes, explicit ACE or ACL permission changes on your OUs, on your users, or on your domain, all of those changes will be recorded right here. Similarly for Azure, where you could monitor logon activity in Azure. You can monitor logon activity based on applications, where you can find out the list of logon successes and logon failures on your application to detect potential password attack attempts. And if I scroll down, you can find out many, many more details, like users who've been granted certain roles in Azure, users who've been added or removed from groups, or users who are owners of groups who have changed, right? Users who've been added to devices, or owners of devices who are changed, applications that were granted administrative consent in Azure. This is the newest way attackers are trying to compromise your Azure AD environments, because they are creating backdoor applications and they are giving those applications admin consent, maintaining persistent backdoor access to Azure AD, so they do not have to compromise the user account one more time. They can use the backdoor application and maintain persistence in your Azure AD environments, right? So whenever admin consent is granted to your Azure AD applications, I would encourage you to look into that, and this report will help you do that, right? Similarly, licenses granted to users, licenses changed for users. Audit your file or folder activities, right? We cannot ignore our files and folders. Whenever there is a file that was created, whenever there's a file that was deleted, modified, whenever there's a permission change on a file or folder, all of those changes will be audited by these reports. And of course, they can be audited across your Windows file servers and other typical data storage devices like your NetApp, EMC, Hitachi, Synology, etc. And we've got a server audit tab that audits your workstations, your member servers, your workgroup machines as well, right? For example, if I scroll down, do you see this option called PowerShell auditing? This will audit any script that your end users are running that they are not supposed to run, right? Most attacks happen via scripts, happen via PowerShell. It's important that you note when your users are running PowerShell scripts knowingly or unknowingly, and these reports will help you get those details, right? So AD Audit Plus component of AD 360 will help you monitor your Active Directory infrastructure, your Azure AD infrastructure, your files and folders, and your workstations, your member servers, etc., for changes in real time, and it will alert the authorized users, right? And do not forget that you can plant a mitigation activity as well. So if there is an alert generated, you can have a mitigation plan set in AD Audit Plus, using which you can counter an attack attempt, or you can counter any sensitive change. Right? For example, if a user is added to an Active Directory group, an administrative group, there will be an alert that is generated, and the script configured within the alert will disable the user account that was added to the group. Right? It's that simple. It's not just alerting, but it's action on the generated alerts. So that is about it for today. There's a lot we looked into. We looked into the importance of IAM. We looked briefly into the native tools and how they fail. And we saw how AD 360 can help you discover permissions, can help you fix vulnerable permissions. We learned to strategize certain management actions from a single console, like delegations, like automating onboarding or offboarding or cleaning up accounts. We learned to enforce a universal password policy. And last but not the least, we learned to enforce security as well. Right? And when we enforce security, any critical change happening across AD or Azure will be brought to notice. Now, before I end this particular webinar session, just another important thing I want to talk about, and that is a workflow feature that is something ignored if you have an AD Manager Plus console, and this is very important, something that needs to be looked into. And if I log into AD Manager Plus, and if I head into workflow, right? So there are certain activities in your Active Directory environment, in your Office 365 environment, that you could set a workflow for, right? So other users in your environment will look at a request that can be raised by a user. And if the users, the other authorized users, approve the request, only then it will be carried out, right? So this is a multi-step check for critical activities that is happening in your Azure or your Active Directory environment, right? You can also time certain activities. For example, do you see this option called set folder permissions? You can set permissions for certain folders based on a specific duration. So this is how it would work. A requester would log in, a requester would raise a request. It would go through multiple people in the workflow, right? And when the people review the request and they approve it, the permission will be granted, but only for the specified time, right? An example of that is your folder permissions, like I just showed you, or users added to groups, right? You can also add users to groups in AD based on a specific time. Similarly, you can have a workflow process set. You can set certain time-based activities for your Office 365 environment as well, right? So yes, that is about it for today. That's discovery, permission fixing, vulnerable permission fixing, centralizing management actions, enforcing a uniform password policy, and enforcing security for monitoring changes on your infrastructures in real time. AD 360, single console for efficient IAM in AD and in Azure or Office 365. So that is about it for today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention.